"Hi, gay," she says somberly, because my demographics indicate a lot of you, myself included, are around my age. Early Gen Zers whose queerness was most likely formed or at least influenced by a subtly out celebrity, or a Hayley Kiyoko music video, or maybe a Disney Channel or Nickelodeon character. Alex Russo famously did an irreparable number on me, and to the unaware, it is rumored Alex and Stevie, who was literally played by Hayley Kiyoko, were canonically and originally written to be romantically entangled. Yes, that's right. I am an Alex Russo bisexual truther. I came of age in the early 2010s where queerness very much existed on the fringes, but in a passive, keep that shit away from me way, as opposed to the woke queer ideology which will bring upon the rapture narrative, which I view as more of a convenient co-opting of queer phobia designed by the right to distract bigots from the fact that grocery prices are still incredibly high. But it's an interesting transition, and that shift is also very much felt in our media. For example, the show that did it for me, and I'm not proud to say this is really vulnerable for me, was Scream, the TV show on MTV. Okay. I know about 7 people nationwide watch that fuck-ass show. But I also know the odds of those other 6 people watching this YouTube video right now are incredibly high. So hello, family, to me. But that was the first time I saw a masculine lesbian character in a featured role in a television show. And baby teamnia was unwell. I genuinely can't remember if the show was good. I do remember hating this bitch so bad though, because I was on my 15-year-old, if you gave me a chance, I'd never treat you like that, soapbox. But I had a beautiful 2 seasons with Audrey, until famously the incident, wherein the producers decided to turn the show into an anthology, introducing an entirely new cast and new plotline for season 3, with no lesbian character. And on top of that, it was ass, real bad. They tried to make it about racism and be meta about the racial tropes perpetuated in horror films that movies like Scream literally solidified in the first place. Meta woke slop, I fear. And I love woke.
Goth, geek, gay? Not a chance. We're usually the first body that drops.
Okay, well, what about me and Kim?
Don't take this the wrong way, but you guys are black.
Girl.
In horror, that's pretty much an insta-kill.
All that to say that in my youth, characters like Willow and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Santana and Glee, or Emily Fields from Pretty Little Liars meant something. They fed us. And all of those shows went on for 6 to 7 season runs, respectively. And they let those bitches be gay. Boots. And with series as successful and culturally impactful as The L Word, and notably Orange is the New Black, which was foundational to Netflix's success, mind you, as pseudo-predecessors, what does it mean that we keep getting chopped? With the recent announcement of the Queer Ultimatum's cancellation on Netflix after a juggernaut first season and a second season that perhaps left much to be desired, in all fairness, the pattern of major streaming platforms canceling shows after 1 or 2 seasons that feature sapphic characters is becoming all too prevalent. So today's question is, why does Netflix hate lesbians? Hi people, brief pause from the video for a message from our sponsor, Aura. So, fun fact, there are these companies making billions selling your information to literally whoever wants it. Spammers, scammers, stalkers, it literally doesn't matter. They don't care, it's legal, it's profitable, and it's happening to every single one of us. You can do everything right online. Strong passwords, private accounts, using VPNs. Unfortunately, it does not matter. Your data's already out there. But lucky for you, today's sponsor is Aura. Aura basically goes after those data brokers for you. It finds the sites that are selling your personal info, goes after them, takes it off, and keeps it off. And yes, there are other privacy tools out there, but Aura goes the extra step. It'll alert you if your info shows up on the dark web, give you real-time fraud alerts for credit and banking, monitor your identity 24/7, and even includes a VPN, antivirus, and password manager. And if anything ever happens, Aura's fraud experts are available 24/7. So instead of trying to literally disappear off the grid to stay safe online, Aura allows you to keep your privacy and live your life. And you can try Aura for free for 14 days at the link down below, which is aura.com/teamnia. And in those 2 weeks, it'll start scrubbing your data off of those data broker sites, and you don't even have to lift a finger. So head to aura.com/teamnia and take your privacy back. And thank you so much to Aura for sponsoring today's video. The Queer Ultimatum, which premiered in 2023, was a show that's development I followed incredibly closely. It's from the same production studio that produces Love is Blind and follows a group of couples where one of the parties wants to get married and work towards marriage and the other does not. And then all these couples feed at each other and then go through a trial marriage. 3 weeks with their new boo from the experiment and 3 weeks with their original partner where they can cosplay marriage with both and then compare. Because what is the natural next step when you and your partner have a fundamental compatibility difference? Go on a reality show and try pseudo-polyamory directly in front of each other, naturally. The show launched for straight couples in 2022, and a bit after it aired, Netflix dropped this cutesy little ad on Twitter.
Maybe I'll move on,
I played that shit back. I put Google Alerts on for real because that's kind of huge. And fun fact, the Queer Ultimatum was not originally developed as its own show. It was meant to be a queer season of the original Ultimatum show. A distinction that I at first found mostly nice in the sense that they were leaving room within the original franchise to expand the queer version as its own standalone piece, but I now see provided a loophole that could dissolve the queer part of the franchise without disrupting the straights. Although lesbian dating shows like I Kissed a Girl and Princess Charming have emerged in recent years internationally, the US, to my knowledge, has not really had a mainstream lesbian-based dating show, like, ever. Mostly, we've seen plays on bisexuality, like Are You the One Season 8, which Ashley Norton just did a wonderful video about, or even to go back into the deep, exploitative, sensationalist reality TV era of the early 2010s, A Shot at Love with Tila Tequila, which Verily Bitchy did a wonderful video about. But lesbians in the US didn't have our version of wholesome-ish sapphics looking for love. And we still don't, but we did have the Queer Ultimatum. Now, the ethos and logic behind the show has long been critiqued and questioned. It definitely gave way to discussions about respectability politics, good representation, and also it wasn't necessarily designed to give us new, cool, queer lesbians we could root for, because by virtue of agreeing to do the show, many people found the entire cast to be on bullshit, just off rip. And in many ways, it was a mess, absolutely. But it was our mess. And as I talked about in my The White Bisexual Problem video essay, I don't really fuck with respectability politics. The idea that showing lesbians being on bullshit on national television will up the stats of homophobia is flawed logic to me, because let's pretend for a second the founding doctrine of this country is like actually real for a second. And all of us are created equal and no one should be experiencing prejudice over things they can't control, whatever, blah, blah, blah. A lesbian or straight woman, a woman or a man, a black person or a white person doing something bad or good should be held to the same standard. And obviously, that is not the case. That is not the reality for marginalized people in this country, and the reason for that is bigotry. I'm not in the business of holding any community I'm a part of to a higher standard to appease bigots. Bigots who are going to be bigots regardless of if we're always on our P's and Q's or not. It also implies lesbians or queer people are not allowed to be people, that we must constantly prove we are not a threat, we are not distorted, we are not evil. When people can be all of those things, regardless of community, orientation, gender, race, whatever. And if people want to drive conclusions about incredibly large, diverse groups based on the actions of 20 dykes on Netflix, that is quite literally a them problem. Nonetheless, The Ultimatum Season 1 was basically the lesbian Super Bowl of 2023. Bars were hosting screenings, media publications were making think pieces, and that casting producer gave us sapphic party hosts that will be remembered for generations. And yes, Season 2 was bad. Painful to watch, narratives didn't align with outcomes, and generally was just a headache. But was it bad enough to warrant a series cancellation? Methinks? No. Especially when the straight seasons of The Ultimatum haven't warranted a cultural revolution by any stretch of the imagination. So why did this happen? Well, frankly, I don't know. I have worked in television development, and I do have a baseline idea of what gets a show greenlit and why. But I worked in nonfiction, so it's a pretty different sector, and I have experience with greenlights as opposed to cancellations. But what we can do is examine these cancellations, because I've seen some of the greatest lesbian romance tropes of my generation halted by Netflix. The Ultimatum sits in a league of its own as a reality show, but in fiction, this trend is incredibly pertinent. These are just a few shows that feature sapphic characters that have premiered and respectively been prematurely canceled in the past 10 years. Notably, the ones I have seen, and thus the ones I'm going to reference further in this video. Everything Sucks, First Kill, I'm Not Okay With This, Warrior Nun, Everything Now, Teenage Bounty Hunters, Dare Me, Insatiable, One Day at a Time, and to name just a few beyond Netflix, the Goss Girl reboot, Willow, A League of Their Own, Generation, High Fidelity, Orphan Black Echoes, The Other Black Girl, Queer as Folk, the iCarly reboot, Velma, The Wilds, and of course, the L Word reboot, the L Word Gen Q. And while yes, I did just list a bunch of words, none of which are in the Bible, I do want to more closely examine the distinction between how lesbian relationships manifest on screen and are actually written in these shows, and what that could potentially reveal about why they're greenlit, and ultimately, why they keep getting canceled. Let's start with the lesbian best friend trope. I also find this oftentimes intersects with the black best friend trope, which in recent years is most likely a result of writers attempting to pigeonhole all the diversity into one character so the show can pride itself off of being progressive whilst not disrupting the cishet and traditionally white main character. For example, Monet from the Gossip Girl reboot on HBO, which was canceled after 2 seasons. The Gossip Girl reboot, which followed a group of wealthy Manhattan teens at a cushy private school uptown, introduced the world to a painfully underdeveloped character that nonetheless I hold near and dear to my heart. Monet DeHaan, rich, beautiful, deceitful, and famously a mean black lesbian. The mean lesbian trope is also a favorite of mine that may potentially warrant its own video, because those are my sisters for real. But within the show, Monet functions as a secondary character. She's a part of the main ensemble, prominently featured in the promotional materials, and featured more or less in every episode. She's the best frenemy to the main character Julian and is supporting cast season 1 and functions somewhat as an antagonist in season 2. Her lesbianism is passive, she's out, but there's not a notable story arc about her queerness and she has no notable love interests. The show characterizes her as a player with many suitors, and that was definitely cool to see. I can't think of another black femme lesbian character that's characterized like that, and I do think there's value to queer characters whose queerness is not at the forefront of the plot. She's allowed to be a vapid, pretty rich girl who just happens to get a lot of play from women. Fantastic. In a similar vein, there's Malika from The Other Black Girl on Hulu, which was canceled after 1 season. Fantastic show. Light spoilers ahead, but really still worth the watch, even though, famously, it is canceled. Psychological thriller about the only 2 black women working at a prestigious publishing house. Nella, the protagonist, and Hazel May, the new hire. It's a show about friendship, corporate racism, and naturally, cults. And when shit hits the fan, it's Malika, Nella's queer best friend, who saves the day. Again, her queerness is passive. It doesn't have major bearings on the plot as a whole, and Malika is generally just a great secondary character who happens to be queer. With both of these examples, we get a couple on-screen sapphic kisses and some subtle but not that subtle allusions to relationships with women, but these are examples of shows with prominent queer characters that are not asterisk queer shows. You get it. Next up, the B plot. If you're not familiar with B plot as a narrative structure, it's basically whatever the fuck Jackson is doing while Miley is deciding between Jesse and Jake. It's whatever Cory's doing while Raven is figuring out what her recent vision meant. It's what Kat and Jade are doing while Tori is... Damn, she didn't really do nothing for real. But you get it. There's an A plot, which typically follows the main character and helps deepen their arc for the rest of the season, and a B plot, which is typically comic relief oriented and is resolved by the end of each episode. Now, the distinction between the lesbian best friend trope and the B plot character trope is screen time and the way queerness interacts with and is platformed by the overarching plot. Take the iCarly reboot on Paramount Plus, which was canceled after 3 seasons. After an egregiously successful original multi-season run in the late 2000s that followed a group of wacky kids running an online web show, iCarly rebooted in 2021 with a moderate response and much critique. I watched about 3 episodes, and again, like I said, don't get me wrong, I love woke. But they were simply doing too much. Too on the nose, trying too hard, and dare I say, not funny.
It's not my job to educate you unless you pay me money.
After its initial announcement, the show faced criticism for the introduction of new character Harper, who fundamentally functioned within the show's structure as Sam, who was Carly's best friend in the original's replacement. Carly's new best friend and the zany character who would typically sustain the B plot. And notably, Harper is black and pansexual. I think this toes a bit of a line between best friend and B plot because obviously she's quite literally the intersectionally marginalized best friend to the main character. But Harper's queerness does touch the plot. She has multiple on-screen romances with women and several arcs that involve queer romance that very much do impact and affect the plot. She also has 2 notable love interests that are named and appear in multiple episodes. Another example, One Day at a Time's Elena. One Day at a Time was a sitcom on Netflix canceled after 4 seasons that followed a newly single Army veteran named Penelope as she navigated the ebbs and flows of raising her 2 kids, Alex and Elena. Elena's a central character who over the course of the show realizes and comes out as a lesbian. I really enjoyed the show for that reason. Compared to a lot of the other media I'm discussing in this video, this is one of the only works that wrote queerness in the context of a family dynamic, as opposed to an explicitly romantic one. It's not a love story, it's a coming out story. And yes, we do have many, but I like this one. I like this show. Elena does eventually get a love interest though, a non-binary person named Sid, and the pair have a multi-episode, multi-season even relationship that typically sustains, you guessed it, the B plot of the show. Another example, but from a show that was not canceled and did indeed get to finish its run, was Never Have I Ever on Netflix, a really incredible coming-of-age show, especially for evil, perfect, deeply flawed women of color who be on bullshit. All credit to our leader, Devi Vishwakumar, who notably has a lesbian best friend, Fabiola, who also gets a slightly family-oriented coming-out arc and several on-screen and plot-pertinent romances, kisses, and relationships. Even at one point with another secondary character that was not originally introduced to explicitly be her love interest, which I thought was dope from a writing perspective, just letting 2 central characters date each other. Like, word, that actually never happens, but from a viewer perspective, took years off my life. But no spoilers. I'm not a scientist, and this isn't a study, but just by general observation based on the list of shows I'm pulling from, the lesbian B-plot character trope appears to live longer than the lesbian best friend character trope. Between iCarly's 3 seasons, One Day at a Time's 4, and Never Have I Ever's 4 with no cancellation, streamers are fucking with a little lesbian love in the corner, doing a little lesbian dance in the corner. You can see it, you know, and they're on the stage. Just don't put that shit in the spotlight. So next up, and I'll keep this one brief, to immediately jump to the opposite end of the spectrum, there is the Queer Ensemble, which is not a trope but a type of show wherein there's a cast of characters who are all or mostly queer, and the point of the show is to follow the lives and loves of this collection of fruits. Fruit basket even, if you will. My mind. The foundational text for this is probably the L Word, lesbians doing lesbian stuff in LA, and cheating, a lot of cheating. Or Orange is the New Black, which to be fair is also about power systems, poverty, family, and a plethora of social and cultural idiosyncrasies, but is also very much about, and most easily synthesized as, lesbians doing lesbian things, in prison. Another one, A League of Their Own. Fantastic show. Max Chapman, you will always be famous. Lesbians doing lesbian stuff, and they're in a baseball league. You get it. These are explicitly queer shows that prominently feature multiple sapphic love stories as a major facet of the plot. I said I'd keep this section brief because I don't really have a choice. There are not many of these shows, and based on my limited knowledge of the television industry and the streamer ecosystem, in times like today, I gander these shows are not easy to get greenlit and funded. Let's look at the L Word as if it's the ancient text, a series that absolutely has its issues, but undeniably revolutionized representation for lesbians in the early 2000s. And Orange is the New Black is like the New Testament. It's in that same vein, making a similar cultural impact, but about a decade later for a different generation in 2013. So why now, about a decade after that premiered, do we not see its natural descendant? These are two shows that concluded their runs and ran for 6 and 7 seasons respectively. And no, it is not lost on me that I've just said 6-7. This is the second time I've said 6-7. I don't know what it means and I don't want to. Majorly successful shows, career-defining roles for many members of the cast, and in the L Word's case, even prompting a spin-off, the L Word Gen Q, that premiered in 2019, but was canceled after 3 seasons. A League of Their Own from Amazon Prime, which premiered in 2022, was canceled after 1. Another attempt that didn't center a sapphic protagonist necessarily, but did have sapphic central characters, was Generation on HBO, a Gen Z high school dramedy that followed a group of queer students that was canceled after 1 season, and then mysteriously and quietly pulled from the streamer for a period of time, despite literally being an HBO original. Like, you couldn't find it. To me, it looks like streamers are not interested in taking a risk on a queer ensemble piece. It's high risk, high reward. And that is not something that the current television industry is interested in or primed to bet on. The longest running example of a recent queer ensemble show being the L Word Gen Q is actually Pose, which came out in 2018 and was made by FX but did get platformed by Netflix. It's actually Pose. And though Pose is only 3 seasons, which is the same length as the L Word Gen Q, it did get to finish its run and was not canceled. And even though Pose doesn't have a prominently featured lesbian character, like, I would be remiss to not give it its flowers as one of the most prominent queer ensemble shows of the past 10 years, so shout out to Pose. The longest running example of a recent queer ensemble show being the L Word Gen Q, which objectively wasn't great. It's not a coincidence. The reason it was greenlit is because it's a reboot. It lowers the risk because this is all a numbers game, right? Netflix became the juggernaut it is because of heavy hitters like Stranger Things, Squid Game, Bridgerton, and anything that is not primed to be turned into an amusement park or have a podcast spin-off is just not going to cut it in today's landscape. The market is simply oversaturated. And while I believe there is an awareness that lesbian ensemble series can and have worked, albeit in incredibly different times politically and culturally, it did happen. They did work. And even the greenlighting of shows like A League of Their Own or Generation or the L Word Gen Q speak to that awareness. But they want breakout runaway hits. They want mainstream. And frankly, that means they need the straights to like it too. And perhaps that was easier to do with the voyeuristic curiosity sparked by shows like The L Word or Orange is the New Black in the 2000s and early 2010s, a time before a collection of lesbian best friends and B plot characters were sprinkled into other media. Now the allure is gone for the straights. They're used to us. Hey, me again. But I think there's a similar parallel here to Pose again, in the sense that I think a show like Pose got to finish its run after 3 seasons because that voyeurism that was placed on lesbians in the early 2000s and early 2010s is placed more in the trans community now. You don't see a plethora of trans women characters featured prominently or secondarily in a lot of media the way you see a lesbian best friend character in today's culture. And I just came up with this, so like take it all with a grain of salt, but I do think there's some observation to be made about the role of acceptance and progression and representation for different communities within the queer community or even within any marginalized community, honestly. I don't know, let me know what you think. My theory is that streamers know or at least believe that if they're making an ensemble lesbian show, the only people guaranteed to watch are lesbians. And that's just not profitable for them. Which brings me to the lesbian lovers. Because I'd say the solution streamers have found to appease the lesbians that they know and count on showing up in mass to support a show, whilst also engaging the others, is the lesbian lover trope, in which a show has a broad scope and plot, but the main character is sapphic or has a prominent sapphic love interest as a central facet of their arc. The most notable, successful example of this is Euphoria. Euphoria on HBO, which has 2 seasons and a 3rd one incoming as I'm writing this, is pretty explicitly about addiction, abuse, grief, and coming of age. Yet, Rue and Jules are one of the most talked about fictional lesbian couples of the past 5 years. And I have many thoughts on the cultural reception of Rue and Jules. Seeing the straight girls from my town dress up as them for Halloween in 2019, 2 characters from a show that centers the sapphic love between a black girl and a trans girl, like, this was even pre-COVID. I just didn't know we were even fucking with lesbians like that back then. But I think it worked. As in, I think the reason cishet people could get behind this explicitly queer love story was because that's not really what the show is about. It's fundamental to the characters, it's a major part of the show, but the characters really never talk about it. As opposed to something like Orange is the New Black or The L Word, where it's deeply explicit and fundamental to the show, those are sapphic shows. Euphoria is a show with a sapphic couple in it. Outside of Jules being trans, Rue and Jules are unlabeled in their queerness. There's no proclamation of, I am a lesbian, a detail that sparked much discourse and debate in lesbian spaces online as Dyke scrambled to figure out if Jules is bi or just experiencing content in season 2. Do y'all remember that? Jesus, horrible week to be on TikTok. But what I think a lot of people didn't understand was that was by design. I read one of the original pilot drafts of episode 1 of Euphoria. It's available online, look it up, and it is way more explicitly queer. Mostly as it pertains to Jules' transness, and not in a great way, because also please remember Euphoria is written nearly independently by a cishet straight man, but Fez does have a line where he says, there's some new, like, edgy trans girl in town. She came in yesterday all Sailor Moon and shit, and I thought, she looks like someone Rue would get along with. ... To which Rue responds in her voiceover, granted, it wasn't Sailor Moon we'd bond over. ... But moments like that didn't make the final cut. The word trans and allusions to Jules' transness are all over that pilot draft, but rarely appear in the finished product, which I'm not saying is a good or bad thing. I honestly think it's both. Good in the sense it allows characters to be queer without it having to be character defining, necessarily. It allows them to just be people first and foremost. But bad in the sense those choices don't exist in a vacuum. And there is an aspect of that choice I theorize was meant to not polarize people who hear the word queer or trans or gay and are immediately inclined to turn that shit off. Their love is a centered subtlety to the plot, whilst a whole bunch of other chaos springs up around them. We never even see them actually confirm their relationship on screen. That always confused me. Did anyone else get super confused in season 2 when they were like dating? I was like, when did they decide that? And while I have many a critique for Sam Levinson, the writer of Euphoria, it has definitely left a notable cultural impact and provided really profound queer representation in the mainstream. And other attempts at frameworks like this have followed. Notably, First Kill from Netflix. One's a vampire and one's a monster hunter, and they're in love. It's lesbian, paranormal, Romeo and Juliet, and its budget was a pack of Reese's Pieces and the love of the game. This show is my guilty pleasure. I loved the first episode. It really should have been a movie. But again, it's a plot that's driven by this paranormal contention in this small town, but the 2 main characters are lesbian love interests. Not a lesbian show, it kind of is, but a monster show about lesbians. Canceled after season 1, though. Me again, sorry. But I actually disagree with myself now. I would say First Kill is objectively a lesbian show, but notice what I said about the budget. Yeah. Or take the Velma reboot on HBO, which got dogged on real bad. But I thought it was pretty good and so gay, and no one talked about it. But the show it's about the Scooby-Doo gang, solving mysteries, healing trauma, but also Velma and Daphne canonically and actively need each other bad. Not a lesbian show, but a mystery show about lesbians. Canceled after 2 seasons. Teenage Bounty Hunters on Netflix, a personal favorite of mine. I don't even want to spoil any of it for you. I wish I could watch it for the first time again. But the plot is in the name. They're teenagers, they're bounty hunters, they're 2 twin sisters. One's buttoned up and the other one is edgy. And then all of a sudden one of them is gay as hell. As hell. Fantastic teen dramedy, robbed of its Emmy. Not a lesbian show, but a crime show with lesbians in it. Canceled after 1 season. Everything Now on Netflix. Bisexual girl is readapting to her high school life and friends after being away in mental health treatment. Not a lesbian show, but a high school drama with lesbians in it. Canceled after 1 season. Willow on Disney+. Fantasy show about saving the world with a sapphic lead and a major sapphic romance as a central plot point. Not a lesbian show, but a fantasy show with lesbians in it. Canceled after 1 season and literally deleted, like scrubbed from the platform. You cannot find that shit. interesting. And I think you get the point. The ensemble framework is too risky, so it's been adapted. And with Euphoria as evidence, all of these shots in the dark that span genre and style are mimicking the balance it was able to strike in order to gain the most mainstream acclaim. And obviously, there are other reasons why Euphoria works as a show. The cinematography is masterful, the score is beautiful, and Zendaya. Orange is the New Black is the L Word's daughter. And Euphoria is Orange is the New Black's daughter. Walk with me. That is this decade's sapphic television show. In a new form, in a new shape, that's been adapted to fit new cultural sensitivities, new prejudices, new ebbs and flows of capitalism, and a totally new landscape with the domination of streaming services. Streamers want to platform lesbians, because lesbians will watch, and that's evidenced. But streamers also do not want to ostracize straight people. The cultural sphere is ever-shifting. Queerness in the mainstream is shaped so differently now in 2025 than it was even just when Euphoria premiered in 2019. And I don't think this trend is going to get better considering the state of our world right now. Seeing something like the Queer Ultimatum get canceled even after within the franchise itself it proved it could garner views, albeit it helps if the season is like, you know, good. But seeing that get the chop because without runaway success, it's useless. They cancel our shows because they can. We are the lesbian deeply in love with her straight best friend. The straight best friend is Netflix. We pine for her to see us, but she wants that man. She wants the football player who thinks lesbians aren't really real, but I will watch it. We are simply the shoulder to cry on. We're the reliable force that even when they disappoint us, time and time again, we'll keep coming back for our crumbs. But at the end of the day, so many of these stories impacted me so deeply, brought me into beautiful worlds, and introduced me to beautiful love stories I hold near and dear to my heart, even if it was for a limited time. So I want to say thank you to all the artists who helped tell and platform these stories, and incredible energy to the storytellers of the future who will keep telling our stories for generations to come. Thank you so much for watching, Gay. Please like, comment, subscribe. Check out my Patreon. I'm about to release a vlog of me going to King Princess's album release party because being gay is quite literally my full-time job. And if you want to stay updated, follow my Instagram. Okay, cool. Peace.